like, comment, and subscribe for more content.
Go, 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 Johnny, go, 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 Johnny, go, go. All right, anyways, enough of me singing. Welcome to this edition of a Funko Popcast. I'm DK Wrestler.
And I'm MD Shady.
And in today's edition, as voted by our followers over on Instagram for the title of this podcast, it's Great Scott, the Back to the Future podcast. Yes, today's podcast is entirely on Back to the Future. And it so happens, as you guys are listening to this on the first day of release, it actually is the 35th anniversary of the first Back to the Future movie and what has kicked off such a great series of movies. Which, if you are new to this podcast and you had stumbled upon this podcast by, I guess, typing out Back to the Future and then the word podcast after, that's great. If you're here because you're a regular viewer of our podcast and want to talk about Funko Pops, that's great. But if you're here for both, that's even better. And so today, we're going to discuss all three Back to the Future movies, number 1, 2, and 3, talk about the Funko Pops involved with them, especially the new 35th anniversary lineup of Pops. But for the fact that we are talking about the 3 movies, we aren't going to get so into descriptive detail of all 3 movies because we are talking about all 3 movies. And so going to description of all 3 movies would just basically take up like 2 hours and it would be a long podcast. So we're basically going to give you guys kind of the plot. And then whenever we talk about the Funko Pops, that kind of will describe about like a certain scene or whatever. And then we'll talk about basically our favorite parts and what we didn't like of each of the movies, of course. But besides that, we'll end off by talking about what Back to the Future Funko Pops we want to see in the future for the Back to the Future lineup. Let's start off, obviously, with the very first Back to the Future movie, which was released July 3rd, 1985, with a budget of $19 million and the box office at $389.1 million, making a total profit of $370.1 million, which is just insane because let's say if it was $20 million, obviously 20 times 10 is 200, so 200 million. So it's made over 10 times the amount of money that the budget had for the movie, which is just insane. For a movie like this, it obviously had to make a couple of sequels, but here is the plot for the movie if in case for some reason you guys haven't seen the movie, which obviously if you are listening to the podcast, most of you guys would have already seen these movies. So, as provided by some users over on IMDb, in this 1980s sci-fi classic, small-town California teen Marty McFly is thrown back into the 50s when an experiment by his eccentric scientist friend Doc Brown goes awry. Traveling through time in a modified DeLorean car, Marty encounters young versions of his parents and must make sure that they fall in love or he'll cease to exist. Even more dauntingly, Marty has to return to his own time and save the life of Doc Brown. So obviously the movie first takes place in 1985. Obviously, if you know Back to the Future, it kicks off with that weird scene with all the different clocks. There's even like a cat clock. And then there's the news playing because like there's a TV randomly turned on where the news lady is basically stating that a bunch of plutonium has been stolen. So then that brings to kind of the first Funko Pop that goes along with this movie is the Marty with glasses that is for the new 35th anniversary lineup. And yeah, this is basically the beginning of the movie where Marty walks into Doc's laboratory and he sees that like everything is a mess. And he goes to try out this amplifier that Doc has that's just humongous. And he plays one like note on the guitar and the speaker just blows and he just kind of like gets pushed back from the force of it and like the shelf falls and everything. That's basically where that happens. And of course, in that scene, Doc calls Marty to tell him to meet him at Twin Pines Mall at 11:15 a.m. Of course, after some moments, including the band rejection and the random lady yelling out, "Save the clock tower," Marty heads to the Twin Pines Mall to meet up with Doc, and Doc shows off his latest science experiment, which is the time machine. So we'll kind of get into like the 2 main characters for this movie. So obviously, as you're looking on your screen, would be the original Marty McFly Funko Pop. Marty McFly is simply a teenager who is usually a troublemaker, or as Principal Strickland would say, a slacker. He's always late for school. As stated in the movie, he was 4 days late in a row. He likes to use the word heavy a lot, as he says this is heavy quite frequently during the movie series. And then, of course, there is the Dr. Emmett Brown Funko Pop, which there are actually two versions made of this specific Doc Brown. There's, of course, the normal one, and he's holding the remote control for the DeLorean. And then there was a MegaCon exclusive glow-in-the-dark Doc Brown. I think actually I checked the Funko app, and it's like $600 Canadian, which is just crazy. But of course, Dr. Emmett Brown, he's a friend of Marty, somewhat of a mad scientist whose experiments usually never work. He likes to use the word precisely and is famous for yelling the phrase, "Great Scott." Of course, that's the title of our podcast. Time Machine Pop rides, as you guys will see, the Time Machine, it's a DeLorean sports car that can travel through time. Doc tests out the time machine using his dog Einstein as a passenger. Before the time machine actually works, Doc says the famous line, "When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're going to see some serious poop emoji," I would say. Then the last pop before we kind of go into talking about 1955 is for the 35th anniversary lineup. It's Marty and Puffy Fest. Of course, during this exact scene, Marty is recording all the footage of the time machine working and how Doc is explaining how it works, including that he uses plutonium that he got by ripping off a bunch of Libyan nationalists. And during the scene, as Doc is about to refuel and go 25 years into the future, the Libyans show up and start shooting. Doc ends up getting shot, and Marty takes off in the time machine, accidentally sending himself to 1955. Of course, now we're in 1955. He sees the newspaper seeing that he's in 1955. You see some of the moments, including he's seen his dad, he's seen Biff, and then kind of accidentally changes how his mom and dad have met. But the first Funko Pop in this case would be the Doc with helmet, a part of the 35th anniversary lineup, which in this scene, Marty finds 1955 Doc to get help from him to get back to 1985. Doc doesn't believe anything Marty's saying, including that Ronald Reagan is the president in 1985. Marty tells Doc the story he told him in 1985 about how he created the time machine, which makes Doc believe in Marty. Of course, going into pretty much what would be the next scene is Marty McFly in the hazmat suit, which this pop was a 2019 New York Comic Con exclusive shared with the Funko Shop, in which in this scene, Doc and Marty had already planned out that they need to get his mom and dad back together since Marty kind of screwed up that. In his hazmat suit, he is portraying as, of course, Darth Vader from Star Wars, but he calls himself Darth Vader from the planet Falcon, in which he wakes up George using a Walkman playing some heavy music to try to convince George to ask Lorraine to the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. George would go along with the plan as Darth Vader told him that he would blow his brains out if he didn't. Then we meet Biff Tannen. Not really officially, because you kind of seen him in the first part of the movie in the cafe, but now you get more of the attire that he's wearing with this Funko Pop, which Biff Tannen is a bully that picks on George, and he wishes that he can be in a relationship with Lorraine, often calls people buttheads, and Biff tries to intervene with George in the cafe as George is trying to ask out Lorraine, but then that moves on to the 1955 Marty Pop that goes along with this 35th anniversary lineup, which Marty trips Biff in this scene and clocks him in the face before being chased by him and his goons. He takes the little kid's scooter, breaks the handles off, and creates a skateboard out of it, which then, of course, during the scene, it leads to, obviously, the infamous scene where Biff crashes his car into the manure truck. His crew and himself are covered in manure along with the car, which would end up costing $300, which you guys would see during the second movie, which we'll kind of discuss. After those events happen, we'll move on to this Funko Pop, the Dr. Emmett Brown with the jumper cables that was exclusive to Loot Crate, which in the scene, Doc shows Marty with a model car on how Marty will be sent back to 1985, which the only way that the time machine would work without the plutonium to create the 1.21 gigawatts of energy is a bolt of lightning, which of course you would have seen earlier in the movie that Marty had the pamphlet that was given to him about saving the clock tower, which shows, hey, look at this. Of course, they need to be at the exact moment that the lightning strikes the clock tower, which is how everything happens. Of course, during the scene, Lorraine shows up to Doc's place as she followed Marty after the incident with Biff because, of course, because of the events that happened earlier in the movie, Marty's mom is now in love with him. And then, of course, there's the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, everything happening with Marty trying to go with the plan. But of course, Biff intervenes with that plan. And obviously, you would see George builds up the courage after seeing that it's actually Biff in the car instead of Marty, punches Biff in the face. And now that's the way that George and Lorraine had fallen in love, which then moves on to the Marty with guitar Funko Pop, which this was a 2018 Fan Expo Canada exclusive shared with FYE. And this is the scene where, of course, after the guitar player cut his hand open from taking Marty out of the trunk because he was locked in there by Biff's goons, Marty replaces the guitar player. He plays Earth Angel, which is the song that Lorraine and George end up kissing to, followed by the infamous Johnny Be Good song by Chuck Berry. And then the last pop for this movie, technically, is the Pop Town that Funko is making for the 35th anniversary. It's got Doc, and it's got the clock tower that is being struck by lightning and hitting one of the posts.
Honestly, there's not a whole lot that I didn't like with the movie. Obviously, the first movie, like, in my opinion at least, doesn't really have any flaws. Besides, I kind of want to know a backstory because either I must have missed it or there wasn't one explained of how Marty actually knows Doc.
That is true.
I've kind of always wondered that, but I haven't really looked it up or anything, and I didn't see it in the movie when I rewatched it. Some of my favorite moments from the movie, obviously the Johnny Be Good scene is awesome, how he's playing the guitar and then he says, like, you guys aren't ready for that yet, which I thought was very funny. The whole movie in general is just really, really good.
One thing I do want to mention, though, for those that might not know, so with the original Doc Brown and the Marty McFly Funko Pops, technically there are actually two versions of that same pop because some people may have the pops that say number 49 and number 50, but along the way, Funko had actually made a box error mistake, and some of the Marty and Doc Browns actually are number 61 and 62. So if you ever go to conventions and you see a Marty pop that is 49 and the Doc that's 50, that's supposed to be what it is. And then there are 61 and 62, which is a box error mistake, which I can't exactly remember which pops were pop movies number 61 and 62. There was that. Plus, they also did that with the MegaCon exclusive glow in the dark Doc Brown, which that's going to be a long time before I get that Funko Pop. I do love the way that this Pop Town looks, and I can't wait to get it. It's such an infamous scene for the Back to the Future movies. And honestly, like, the pops look great for number one. Especially, I feel for the singular pops, I love the Biff one. I think they did a great job with that one. As terms to favorite moments in the movie, of course, there's a lot. I do love the whole, my name is Darth Vader, I'm from the planet Falcon. That's one of my favorite scenes of the movie. Of course, the maneuver scenes are awesome. And I do love the fact the guitar player's name for that band that was playing at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance was Marvin Berry. Marvin picks up a phone. He's calling his cousin, who is Chuck Berry, who in real life actually created the song Johnny Be Good. So it was almost kind of cool that they decided, like, all right, Marty McFly wrote Johnny Be Good, and then Chuck Berry stole it. So I kind of found that pretty funny,
Yeah.
honestly. So I should mention that obviously they get back to 1985. They, as in Marty, I should say. Marty gets back to 1985. You know, there was obviously some troubles with setting everything up because the car wasn't starting, but he just kind of headbutted the horn on the wheel and it just starts like that for some reason. And then Doc had some troubles with setting up the whole thing because like the cord kept unplugging. But Marty gets back to 1985, so clearly the experiment worked. He arrives back at Twin Pines Mall at exactly the moment he left. And he believes that Doc is dead once again because he witnessed that whole scene again. But it ends up that Doc actually read the letter that Marty gave him because Marty gave him a letter basically specifically stating what would happen in 1985. And he wore a bulletproof vest to prevent his death. Of course, Marty wakes up the next day and everything is different in 1985. Everyone looks different. Everyone has different jobs. And pretty much the roles are reversed with Biff and George, as Biff is kind of more of the wimp now. And George is more of kind of the tough guy because of the fact that he punched Biff in the face in 1955. So he's more of the dominant person now. His mom looks different because obviously, if you notice in the first movie, before everything happens, his mom is kind of like this alcoholic and she's kind of big, but now she's like super skinny. Of course, we won't talk about like what happens right after because that pretty much kicks off the second movie. So we'll go right now to the second movie. So Back to the Future Part 2 released November 22nd, 1989 with a budget of $40 million and the box office of $335.9 million, making a profit of $295.9 million, which isn't as much of a profit as the first movie made, obviously. But here's the plot as provided by a user on IMDb. The second part of the trilogy begins as Doc, Marty, and Jennifer take the time-traveling DeLorean into the year 2015 to straighten out the future of the McFly family. But Biff Tannen steals the time machine and gives his younger self a book containing 50 years of sports statistics, which the young Biff uses to amass an enormous gambling fortune and transforms Hill Valley into a living hell. To restore the present, Doc and Marty must return to the events of their previous adventure in 1955 and retrieve the book. So, of course, like that plot had said, the beginning of the movie is pretty much the end of number one. So, I guess that'll bring to the first Funko Pop for this movie, technically, which is the 2015 Doc, where he's wearing the yellow coat. Doc comes strolling in with his DeLorean and he tells Marty that him and Jennifer need to come with him to 2015. Marty is wondering why this is happening, and he's like, why do we have to come with you? Do we become assholes or something? Along the lines of that, and then Doc says the line, where we're going, we don't need roads. And of course, the reason they're going to 2015, like it said in the plot, is because some actions happened with his kid Marty Jr. that would later show in the newspaper that Marty Jr. ends up going to prison for, I think it's 15 years, because him and Griff, which we'll talk about Griff in a little sec, they end up robbing a bank. Only Marty goes to prison, I'm pretty sure, for 15 years. That's how it is. But obviously, they go to 2015. The DeLorean is now flying, so the wheels kind of fold in and they fly. Now we go to the Marty in future outfit, which obviously Marty is wearing 2015 clothing and must act like his son and take place by going to the Cafe 80s so that he can deny Griff's opportunity, which is obviously robbing the bank. And in this actual scene for this movie, this is actually the first time that we see Marty reacting to a person calling him chicken, because obviously if you're a huge fan of the series and you know about Marty McFly, you know that he doesn't like being called chicken and that he takes that very seriously. He gets mad. We'll go on now to, you'll see on your screen, the Marty with hoverboard, which there's two versions that we'll show you guys. First was Marty McFly with the hoverboard. That was a fun exclusive in the US. It's Marty on the hoverboard, and he's actually kind of floating on the hoverboard, in which this is actually, I think, the second most expensive Funko Pop in the Back to the Future lineup. This is around, I think, $200 if I'm not mistaken. And then there's a newer one that's being made that's a Pop and Tea bundle that'll be exclusive to Walmart, a part of the 35th anniversary lineup. But this time, Marty actually is holding the hoverboard and he's not riding the hoverboard. And in this scene, he recreates the chase scene from the first movie, except with a hoverboard this time. So he takes the little girl's hoverboard with the handle, breaks off the handle, and then he rides the hoverboard. And he ends up going into this body of water, which the hoverboard doesn't work on unless you have power, which obviously Griff has a powered hoverboard. Griff, first of all, I should have mentioned, is the grandson of Biff Tannen. So after Griff and his goons end up actually crashing into City Hall, the newspaper ends up changing, in which it's Griff who will go to prison instead of Marty Jr. This is basically where everything happens now with what the plot says. So old Biff takes the DeLorean back to 1955, gives a sports almanac that Marty had bought at a store before, trying to find Jennifer, because Jennifer ends up getting taken back to what would be her current house. Biff goes back in time, and basically, like I said, he changes everything. So I guess what I can mention before going into our favorite parts of number two and what we liked, what we didn't like in the Funko Pops. As Marty and Doc arrive back in 1985, Marty goes into his house, and it's actually occupied by another family, in which the city's a mess. There's so much gun violence, and there's a lot of vandalism when you see this 1985. Lorraine is married to Biff, and it's later revealed that Biff actually killed Marty's dad, George, before Marty and Doc end up going back to 1955. And of course, basically the ending of this would be that Biff crashes into another manure truck, just screwing up his car yet again. Marty burns the sports almanac. Doc is in the air with the time machine. It's having some glitchy problems. And then it gets struck by lightning, and he just completely disappears. Marty doesn't know what's going on. And then, of course, it starts raining, and Marty receives a letter from Doc that was written in 1885 stating that he's fine and well and that he's living in the Old West.
At the beginning, when I was rewatching Back to the Future Part 2, I was thinking, within the first 10, 15 minutes, I was like, this movie is not going to be what I remembered it to be. This movie is going to suck. And then I think it's my favorite Back to the Future is the second part. It's just so cool how they kind of flopped between what they've already done before, and you kind of see, like, obviously Doc not dying or whatever. I really love Biff Tannen's like character development over the years. Obviously, Biff was like one of my favorite characters in the second movie for sure. One of my favorite parts is Biff Tannen's casino. I forget what the actual name for the casino is.
Oh, yeah, I honestly don't know. I know they mentioned in that movie there's a Biff Tannen museum.
Yes, there's the museum as well. It was funny also seeing, like, in, what was it, 1989 when they made this movie, or when it was released at least, their kind of take on what 2015 would be like, which is obviously completely wrong, but
Yeah.
just hilarious. Really, really good movie.
Yeah, part 2, one thing I always wanted to know is about the Cafe 80s. Like, there's so much stuff that was in the Cafe 80s. It would have been so awesome to see now. Like, I always imagine, I'm like, man, I want to see a Pepsi bottle like the way they had it, or like a drink coming from a tube, and like when you're ordering it. And then, like, I loved seeing, like, it was kind of glitchy, but like the TVs being kind of like your waiter. It's almost like kind of today where like you walk into a McDonald's and you order from basically a kiosk machine. And then all of a sudden, like, that's how you're taking your order and stuff. That's kind of like, I guess part of that was right when they were predicting about 2015. They actually ended up making, it was limited, but they made the Pepsi bottles. And now,
Oh, yeah?
yeah, they made the actual Pepsi bottles for that movie. I don't know how long they were doing it and what the limited piece was for that, but I know for a fact I did recently, I think a couple weeks ago, searched up on eBay, someone selling a bottle for $400 Canadian.
Jeez
So
Louise.
it still has the Pepsi inside.
Huh. That's really cool. Going off of what you said with the TV is, I found it really funny how when Marty gets fired, how it like prints out the sheet that says you're fired on it.
Oh yeah,
And like technically, like back then, it's similar to like a fax machine, obviously, but it's more futuristic, but it's totally just wrong for what 2015 actually is, where we have like devices like our smartphones and stuff, where you wouldn't just get a piece of paper that comes through like your TV that says you're fired or whatever other message. Another thing I wanted to talk about is, I'm going back to Biff again. I guess he's my favorite character for some reason. But I really like how in, I think, just about every movie, I don't know if he says it in the third, because I don't believe Biff's actually in the third movie. When he says, make like a tree and get out of here. He says it over and over again throughout the movie. Thought that was so, so funny. And then obviously at the one point, someone says to him, it's leave. It's not,
yeah, that was,
get out of here.
yeah, he said that to young Biff. That's where they're in the garage.
Right, yeah.
Older Biff would tell younger Biff after, you know, you got to keep that almanac with you at all times. And yeah, that was a funny scene too. You have old Biff interacting with young Biff, and then young Biff is freaking out that like older Biff knows how to start his car. Going back to like some of the stuff that's happened. So they ended up also doing like not as advanced as it was in the movie, but they did make those Nike shoes that Marty wears. They did that. And then I think they were in some sort of weird development for a hoverboard. And here's another, actually, it was an Easter egg for the hoverboard scene. So I don't know if you noticed this, but the company that made the hoverboard, and it shows the logo on there, was Mattel.
Yeah.
Which I found pretty funny rewatching it, that it was created by Mattel at this point.
I didn't know that you didn't know that. That's funny. That's like the one thing I knew about Back to the Future before rewatching the movies.
And of course, I think it's kind of a little bit funny. They talk about in the second movie, like, oh, the Chicago Cubs, they won the World Series. They didn't win in 2015, but they actually ended up winning in 2016. So they were like literally 1 year off.
Yeah.
I wish sometimes MLB should have just like worked it so that like, all right, let's actually make the Chicago Cubs beat the, Miami Marlins.
Yeah.
In I forget how many games that they said. As terms to the Funko Pops, the Marty McFly in the future outfit. I've explained this in a couple podcasts already, where I don't like how they ended up just having Marty with a silver hat and not the actual multicolor hat, because I think that would have been awesome. That was a cool thing in the second movie, was that kind of multicolor hat. And actually at Comic-Con last year, your buddy Brandon ended up getting one, right?
Yeah, he knows nothing about Back to the Future, but he just thought it was a cool looking hat. If I'm not mistaken, that's actually somewhere at my house right now, laying around somewhere. So
yeah, if only you would have found it. Maybe you'd be rocking that hat during this podcast right now.
Yeah.
So now I guess this is where we will move on to talking about the third movie. So Back to the Future Part 3. And a little known fact actually is Back to the Future 2 and Back to the Future 3 were actually filmed practically like simultaneously. Between the two movies, it took almost a year to make, but I remember I watched an interview recently where they actually took a 3-week break in between. So once they finished number 2, they took a 3-week break and then went straight to doing number 3. So Back to the Future Part 3, it was released May 25th, 1990, and the budget was $40 million with the box office of $246.1 million with a profit of $206.1 million, which obviously Back to the Future 3, it wasn't the greatest of the 3 movies, but it was okay. Like, it was pretty good at best. Once again, as shown on IMDb, in this final chapter, Marty McFly obtains a 70-year-old message from time-traveling Dr. Emmett Brown, in which he informs Marty that he has retired to a small town in the Old West. Marty then finds out that Doc was murdered shortly after sending the letter. In order to save his friend, Marty will have to travel back in time, disentangle a love-struck Doc from a local school marm, and repair the DeLorean, all while avoiding a posse of gunslingers. So, of course, same thing that happened with number 1 and number 2. Number 3 has the exact same beginning as the end of number 2. The movie kicks off exactly where the second movie ended, where the original Marty McFly is sent back to 1985, and Doc is happy that the experiment worked. When he is about to leave, the second Marty McFly that you would have seen in the second movie appears to confront Doc, and Doc says, "I just sent you back to the future," with Marty replying, "I know, but I'm back. I'm back from the future." Doc would then pass out after saying "Great Scott." Doc would then wake up in his house after Howdy Doody Time starts playing on the TV, and he still doesn't understand how Marty came back from the future until Marty shows the letter that 1885 Doc gave him. Doc and Marty would then go to an abandoned mine to dig up the time machine that was hidden by 1885 Doc. Marty finds Ferdicus, which is Einstein in 1955, near a tombstone that ends up being Doc's tombstone. It was later revealed that Doc was killed by Buford Mad Dog Tannen 1 week after he sent the letter, in which Marty would then vow that he would use the time machine to prevent Doc from getting killed in 1885. Of course, this is where we're going to talk about the one and only pop made so far for Back to the Future 3, which is Marty McFly in the cowboy outfit. This was a Hot Topic exclusive. This is where Marty is about to head to 1885 in the time machine. And when he makes it to 1885, which he kind of just goes 88 miles per hour, and he's going through like this picture that is shown at a drive-in theater. Basically, he's being chased by a group of Indians, because that's what the photo is. It's just a bunch of Indians riding on horses, in which he finds a cave after for safety. Of course, Marty is later chased by a black bear. He falls down a hill, knocks himself out after he crashes through a wooden fence. Of course, he would meet what would be his great-great-grandparents, which are Seamus and Maggie McFly, along with his great-grandfather, William McFly, who is the first McFly born in North America. Marty ends up going into town after and gets into a little trouble with Buford Mad Dog Tannen, which is either the great-great or just the great-grandfather, probably great-great-grandfather of Biff Tannen. Before, obviously, Doc saves him. As Doc and Marty figure out how to get back to 1985, they save a teacher by the name of Clara Clayton from falling into a ravine, which is later revealed that there was a ravine called Clayton Ravine after a teacher had fell into a ravine, but they basically prevented that from happening, no longer being named Clayton Ravine. Later on, we go to the town festival. During this actually is one of the more funny, memorable scenes in number 3, where Marty tries out a gun and shoots all the targets. He gets asked where he learned to shoot like that, in which his reply is 7-Eleven. Of course, controversy stirs up between Mad Dog and Doc. Marty throws a pie plate at Mad Dog as he shoots Doc, and the gunfight is planned to happen at 8 a.m. on Monday between Marty, or as I should say his name is in 1885, Clint Eastwood, and Buford. After some moments, including Doc telling Clara that he has a time machine, but her not believing him, the gunfight is set between Clint Eastwood and Buford Mad Dog Tannen. Marty would get shot by the gun, but he doesn't get killed due to having a metal plate as a bulletproof vest. Marty knocks out Buford, and Buford lands in manure. Doc and Marty hijack a train to push the time machine to 88 miles per hour. Clara ends up being on the train and gets saved by Doc on a hoverboard after almost falling off. Marty makes it back to 1985, but the DeLorean gets destroyed by a train. Marty gets back home with his brother asking, what are you supposed to look like? Clint Eastwood? Marty picks up Jennifer, but gets challenged to a race by Needles, in which he accepts but puts the car in reverse. This would change the future as seen in 2015. Of course, basically the ending, you would see Doc and Clara in a time-traveling train with Einstein, and they have kids by the names of Jules and Verne, which is inspired by their favorite author, Jules Verne, by separating the first and last name, giving Marty a framed photo of them in front of the clock tower, or I should say in front of the clock that goes on the clock tower in 1885. And of course, the train gets off the tracks and is also flying, and then basically goes to the screen, and that's how the third movie ends.
Yeah, so as soon as I started watching this movie, it was kind of like the other one. Not where I thought the movie was going to suck, but I was like, okay, this is definitely going to be the worst of the trilogy. But I actually really enjoyed the movie. I kind of thought it was a cool change of pace to have it kind of westernized and some new characters that we get to see, which was super cool. One thing that I found kind of weird about the movie was when they stopped Clara from dying, it obviously changes the future because it wouldn't be called the Clayton Ravine, right?
Yeah, that's
But
what I was saying.
but at the same time, it's not like anything super important with history has changed because of that.
Yeah.
Because it's just the name of a ravine. Anyways, it's not something super tragic or anything. But yeah, I just thought it was weird that like Doc was so you can't change the future, don't change the past, and then obviously he falls in love. So I guess he gets to do it himself. I do really like the cowboy pop. I really, really like the fact that the boots are off and he's holding them. I think that's just so smart because of obviously what happens in the movie. One of my favorite from the set, to be honest.
It does look really cool. It would have been cool if they actually put Clint Eastwood on the box rather than Marty McFly. I forgot to mention actually when we were talking about number 2 is that with the original hoverboard pop is actually the only Back to the Future pop where it actually says where the specific movie is, because on the original one, the Fun exclusive, it actually does say Back to the Future 2 on the box. I felt that for this one, they could have done Back to the Future 3 on the box. Obviously, like I said earlier about how this wasn't the greatest movie out of like the 3, it was still a pretty good movie, honestly. And I think it was a pretty good like end to the franchise. I love the scene where he just randomly says 7-Eleven as a response to how he learned to shoot like that. Obviously, he was saying like, you know, he learned how to shoot from like, let's say an arcade game that was set up at a 7-Eleven, but saying it in 1885 where clearly 7-Eleven was not even made yet. I don't know if you know about this, was the band that's playing in the town festival is actually ZZ Top.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so it's ZZ Top that is the band that's playing during the town festival while everyone is dancing. So now we'll move on to what Funko Pops we want to see next for the Back to the Future lineup, which I can go all day with talking about. I want to see this pop. I want to see this pop. Like I could probably easily think of 10 different Funko Pops to see in the Back to the Future lineup, maybe 20, but I have only listed off 2 pops per Back to the Future movie. What are yours?
So the first one that I would love to see the most, I think, is Biff Tannen's Casino with middle-aged Biff. Pop Town, that would be wicked. Sticking with the trend of Biff, I would like to see a Pop and Tea bundle of old age Biff, and the box looks like the Sports Almanac.
Ooh.
I think that would be really cool. I don't know what the t-shirt would be, but I think Funko could definitely make something pretty cool out of that.
I feel like the T could be Biff as he's using his cane hitting off of Marty's head.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. That would make a lot of sense for sure. Moving on, a pop rides of Clara Clayton on the train, I think would be really, really cool as well. And then maybe if they didn't want to actually do a pop rides, because I don't know exactly how good that would sell, just a Clara Clayton pop just in general, but I think a pop rides would be really cool. And then the last one is kind of the same deal where it could be a pop ride or it could just be a standalone pop. And I think it'd probably be a better idea to have it be the standalone pop. But the young Needles.
Of course, you would say that because for those that might not know, Needles is played by Flea, who is the bassist of Red Hot Chili Peppers.
And yeah, they're my favorite band. But yeah, I think a young Needles would be really cool. And obviously, if it was like the Bride with the Red Truck, that'd be really cool as well. But I also think a standalone pop would probably sell better.
Starting off with the first movie, I would like to see a pop rides of Biff with his car. Or out of that, which would even be better, is like more of a movie moment where they would cut it in half and maybe it would be Biff in his car being covered by manure. I think that would be cool. And then, of course, a Lorraine pop. I think a Lorraine pop in 1955 would be awesome. I would have said something like George and Lorraine, but of course, with the whole issue with like Crispin Glover in that, I don't think there's ever going to be a George McFly Funko Pop or even action figures. But for number 2, a Griff Tannen Funko Pop would be cool, especially if they have a nice expression on his face, the spikes on his helmet, and then like the way his attire looks. And then, of course, Old Man Biff. I had to put Old Man Biff because I think he'd look so funny in a Funko Pop form. And then I don't know whether like he would actually be walking with the cane or actually like holding the cane with like the knuckle on it, like if he was going to use it to hit your head with it. But yeah, those definitely had to be the 2 I choose for number 2. And then for number 3, a Buford Mad Dog Tannen Pop. You know, you got the mustache, the cowboy hat. It would look so cool in a Funko Pop form. And then, of course, like you've actually mentioned, the time traveling train pop rides. I don't know how likely it would be to ever make another pop rides of the actual DeLorean itself, because I could say for number 2, the DeLorean actually like floating in air where the tires are like bent. But
Yeah.
the time traveling train with Clara would make more sense. I thought of Doc, but I mean, that's already another Doc. But yeah, that's basically it. But anyways, that's going to be the end of this week's podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you smash that like button to let us know that you're enjoying the content being provided to you guys on this channel. Comment in the comments section below on what your favorite Back to the Future movie is and what Funko Pop you want to see next in the Back to the Future lineup. Press that subscribe button for more content like this podcast and other videos we do on this channel in the future, and press the little bell beside it to be notified of when that future content gets released. Also, if you haven't yet, follow us on all of our social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at a Funko Podcast. It'll be listed in the description below. But anyways, guys, thank you all for listening to this week's podcast. We hope to see you guys next week. 1, 2, 3, I'm out of here.
Make like a tree and get out of here. Peace in, peace out.